Welcome to what is now an ongoing series about playing various teams in Limbus, and a record of how uncreative I am with naming these things. What on earth am I going to name the Rupture one? Hopefully by this point you get the general idea. I'll give you a rundown on all the Poise IDs, spending more time on the good ones, give some notes on ego, and then try to win the video with a decent team. It's worth mentioning Poise is still actively gaining support during the season, so there's a reasonable chance I'll have to make an addendum, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. For now, I'm going to try and format this video in a more coherent way than the previous. I'm going to start with the pure Poise IDs, move on to the hybrids, and then end with the weird ones. As such, the best start is probably Blade Lineage E-Song as the most vanilla Poise ID possible. Before I do though, I'm once again assuming you're up to 4 and post Canto 8. E-Song is an interesting case, given its absolutely absurd passive. 4 owned pride for plus 3 coin power is obscene. There's a reason he's one of the only sinners to only have 1 coin egos. His kit is clearly balanced around the passive, thankfully. His S1 is a fairly standard 1 coin, his S2 is bad, and his S3 rolls below average. Once he hits 10 or 15 poise count though, he hits the levels you'd expect from the canonical weakest sinner. A 16 rolling S1 isn't too much, and a 17 rolling S2 is unimpressive, but a 23 on an S3 is pretty good, all things considered. It also bears mentioning how high his bases are. It's not a major advantage, but it does help him with low SP clashes. I'll go over his ego now, if only because none are great for Poise. As with most teams that aren't Tremor, Sloth is in short supply, and literally all but one of E's ego costs Sloth. Thankfully, his only Poise ego is the exception, and for Poise it is pretty cheap. Fell Bullet is an interesting piece that I have to admit I'm biased against. And my issue isn't that sacrificing allies is bad mind, but that the ego does next to nothing if it doesn't get that kill. A 30 roll is better than the average given the price and attack weight, but no matter what, you're going to be losing value somewhere in the exchange, given the numerous faults it has. Firstly, the damage conditional on enemies requires a crit, which means firing it early is unlikely to do much more than a pittance of damage, barring bringing a low level jobber in to die. The passive is bad, as with every single on-kill passive, and if the first coin doesn't kill, you have one of the worst egos of the tier. Finally, the ego simply cannot clash. It'll always target the lowest health ally as the main target, so barring solos, it's pretty limited. If nothing else, it's still a decent option and has some uses in speedrun content, also just to pick up kills in longer fights. Put a pin in that though, I'll get back to this later. Moving on, let's go to a much more interesting and much more dysfunctional ID, who you might remember getting a slight mention back in the Bleed video. Blade Lineage Faust is easily the ID with the most simple to describe issue. Red Plum Blossom, the entire crux of her kit, is simply unsustainable, mechanically underwhelming, and far too limited to give Blade Lineage Faust a spot on any team past 6 Blade Lineage idiots. Her base spread of 9, 16, 17 is pretty mediocre given the coin counts, and her coin power conditionals are both underpowered, being single coin power for S1 and S2, while also not being free given her slow access to Poise potency. Her S3 is good, especially with the slash fragility and defense level down being applied at a pretty high speed range, along with it being the only skill that can actually set up a reasonable RPB stack. The problem, however, is that any other sinner hitting that part will rapidly burn through the blossoms and likely won't give any reasonable bonuses for doing so. RPB is consumed on hit, but only provides any bonuses on crit, and those bonuses get weaker the less of the stack you have. In a theoretical world where Faust can hit one part of an enemy by herself for the whole fight, she can do some pretty decent work. Assuming she has a certain later ID to make her count positive, she can have a permanent plus 50% damage boost against that part, with her S3 getting up to some comical percentage increases. However, her kit still has issues there. The defense level down from passive is only inflicted on the last coins of her S1 and S2, meaning that unless you double slot her, you can't take advantage of it for 5 out of 6 turns, with a very similar case for her slash fragility on the S3. It's a small mercy, therefore, that Thoracalgia exists. Given that a certain poor sod doesn't have it, I'll give it a detailed rundown for you. Thoracalgia, given its effects, is a bargain at 7 resources, especially considering that Blade Lineage Faust can easily fuel this if you choose to run her. You get a 3-weight 18 roll on 2 coins. This might sound somewhat underwhelming, but the rest more than makes up for it. Assuming you get the piss easy 3 plus pride res conditional, you apply 3 to 6 poise potency to all allies, minor, 1 poise count, minor, and shallow exhale, huge. A unique buff that causes allies with 20 or more potency to gain 1 count whenever they gain potency for a turn. Somehow this has no further limitations, meaning most modern Poise IDs can gain 2 to 3 poise count each off of this buff, and this is just the before attack effect. The on hits are fine, Faust gains a count for each enemy hit, the second coin deals up to 40% more damage on crits, but the real source is the passive, and the second unique buff, Nebulizer Alpha. Next then, after popping Thoracalgia, Faust will gain a stack of this blessed status. Every turn from this point on, all allies gain a 1-1 stack of poise, and assuming you've got people up to 20 plus potency, you'll heal the lowest HP allies a small pittance, the amount of healing grows with resonance, and every 10 count gained from the status increases the healing permanently. Once you're fully set up, you can heal 6 allies for 10% every single turn. A 1-1 stack might sound minor, but it bears mentioning how many allies only need a small bit of guaranteed poise potency or count per turn to go positive, or at least speed them up notably. That said, I'll get back to Thoracalgia later. Blade lineage done. Yep, look at that. It's a Poise ID. I don't know, man, she's pretty boring. Standard 00 numbers across the board, slight conditionals, just under the requirements to be self-sufficient, and some synergy with an intended team. Is it still controversial to say I'm glad 00s are dead? In any case, she's a more workable ID than Blade Lineage Fausts, and not a bad choice to run if you want to focus on the 2 really good Blade Lineage members. As for Ego, she doesn't really have anything. Wishing Cairn requires her to kill a target with bleed, which isn't impossible, but is yet another goddamn kill passive, except this one needs setup for a 2-2 poise stack. Red Sheet does give you a bonus for getting a crit. If you think 3 defense level down, at best, is worth 5 gluttony, then feel free to invest in the taxidermied corpse of Talis Claire. But Ryoshi lets me get back to the fun IDs. Once again, standard rolls, and yet another 2 coin S2. In practice, she's the fixed version of Blade Lineage Faust, setting up a debuff on target, then keying off of that debuff for bonus damage and passive conditionals. Unlike Blade Lineage Faust, however, her debuff isn't removed by other IDs breathing too hard next to the marked enemy, and she's actually entirely self-sufficient in terms of poise potency and count. Her biggest sin is speed to ramp up. Unlike most IDs on the team, she takes quite a while to get rolling, given her S2 is majorly negative on count until every enemy gets marked. Marks also decay each turn, meaning she can't afford to spend too many turns ego spamming, which given Ryoshi's deep toolbox is a shame. Speaking of those ego, Ryoshi was a fuck ton to go over. Forest of the Flames is a standard big roll, and at a reasonable price. You don't want to need this, but having it available is always a plus for Ryoshi. Red Eyes is expensive, as always, but this is probably the best ID for it. Butler gains a lot of haste to proc the speed conditional, and appreciates the passive to further boost the speed difference. As with literally every single team, Contemptor is great, regenerates resources, gives a damage boost, hits hard, looks amazing. Honestly, I might just start reusing me saying this in every video from now on. The He's, however, are where the decision making comes in. There's a legitimate choice to be made. 4th match is the default good choice, cheap, big roll, weight and a good passive. I wouldn't fault anyone on any team running 4th match and never looking back. Red Eyes Open is here too, and much like the little version at its best. The price is high but not too bad. The coin power conditional is entirely free here, but it needs to be done the turn after that little version if you want the damage conditional. Healing your lowest HP ally is nice, but I've got a slightly better idea of what to do to that damaged ally. Thoracalgia. I'm going to assume the 2 almost nerfed IDs had a child, and somehow it was this ego. Please don't ask, this metaphor barely worked. The Awakening version is decent, but absolutely not the main attraction. Depending on Ryo's current poise, it will either be a substantial infusion of poison count, or a pretty high rolling nuke up to a 30 across 2 coins. Either way, you get a bit of deep inhale, damage boost on crits once you have 15 plus potency, and a passive that I'll get into shortly. The real reason to use this is the overclock. You may recognise this from various railway speedruns, in which they let you generate poise and resources early if you popped it with Superbia. This did get made worse by a bug fix, meaning first turn usage can now actually hit more than one ally, but for 99% of players this has no downside. Immediately, this ego gives Ryoshi a 7-5 stack for the mere price of 10% of her max HP. Then, unlike Fell Bullets, both coins damage enemies and allies, on top of having far more damage given it actually generates poise beforehand, and has damage conditionals outside of crits. If you manage to kill the targeted ally, you get a bevy of rewards. Ryoshi fully refunds the SP cost, generates 3 ego resources, gives the subbed in ally a 4-4 stack, and gains 2 additional stacks for her passive. Speaking of the passive, here it is. Nebulizer Beta, also known as Bootleg Nebulizer Plus. Given that Pride Resonance is entirely free for poise, Ryoshi gets a 3-3 stack of it every single turn, and for each countered beta, she applies 3-3 to another ally, capping out at 5 other allies generating poise. Assuming you only killed one character, that being the targeted ally, then Ryoshi is generating 12 poise per turn, entirely for free, and targeting your sinners with the least poise. As if all of that wasn't enough, the corrosion also almost guarantees Ryoshi gets 10 deep inhale, meaning she gets to deal even more damage. Just by word count it should be clear which ego I recommend, but simultaneously, they're all good enough to commit to. Next we get our first 3 coin skill 2, and Massault's first good ID. Blade Lineage Mer is a well known good ID, and the first in a long line of support IDs. In this case, ability support for, shockingly, Blade Lineage. Sadly, he's not good enough support to drag the bad Blade Lineage IDs anywhere into relevance, and never was. It'll take a lot more than slight poise gain and clash power to fix the 3 bad IDs issues. This isn't too fair though, as even without a single Blade Lineage ID, Mer is great. He's got an 11, 18, 20, technically, set of rolls, and has a pretty easy time getting them to a 13, 21, 12. For some bizarre reason, he's only got single coin power conditionals, but that really doesn't matter. His passive, or at least the one you'll actually use, is really good. You'll want to hit 3+ Pride Res every single turn to trigger it. There's a lot of text there, but it basically amounts to Mer gets a get out of jail free cards, his S1 and S2 apply poison counter Blade Lineage allies, and he gives every single Blade Lineage ally 1 coin power or 3 for 1 coin skills, on top of bonus crit damage. As for ego, it's Mer. What do you want me to say? He has Chains of Others, he has Pursuance, I am legally obligated to say that yes, he's an assault, he has regret, all of his skills have multiple coins, and it's cheap. The first 2 ego are not. 4 sloth. Did I forget to mention anything about Mer? I don't think so. He's a pretty straightforward and basic good ID. Full stop Honglu. I really like the art, but there's not going to be enough time to get into detail. This ID is complex. First, as with most Wolp IDs, he's completely overtuned. 12, 19, 22 unconditionally, he's an ammo ID who doesn't have the downsides any other ammo ID has, and his passive means he effectively doesn't have to worry about poise decay each turn. Now for specifics. For some reason, all of his skills are just overloaded with poise gain. His S1 is a 5-3 stack on turn 1, his S2 is a 3-3, his S3 is another 5-3. The S2 in particular is just a travesty of design. Not only is it beyond the pale in terms of rolls, but it also has a damage conditional on 2 of the coins, applies bind and attack power down next turn, and has very good odds to call the second best S2 in the game onto the same target. This only gets more egregious with the S3. It has even more damage conditionals, applies pierce, fragility and bind, raises stagger threshold, and always calls the aforementioned S2. Even if you manage to run out of ammo, you get access to a 13 roll encounter that reloads, is poise neutral, and has damage conditionals. Who designed this ID? I'll go into the old S2 and S3 once we get into the second part of the team up, so I'll mention the ego for now. They're not great. Land Evolution is still a lot of resources for an okay ego, Hong still lacks a generic He, and Tears is absurdly expensive for a skill that doesn't do anything without Honglu killing someone. This ego has its uses, but nowhere near poise. As for Teth, people really undervalue Soda. Obviously it's not worth running on every team, but while Bleed far prefers Roseate for the passive, and Tremor has its mandatory content in Cavernous, Soda is far better generically than either of those two, and obviously better in poise. Yes, I will explain myself here. The healing is underwhelming. Yes, there are very few situations in which 38 total healing matters. That's not what this ego is good for. It's one of very few egos that are designed for chain battles. Whenever any enemy dies, whether or not Honglu did anything to help, you get a bit of SP to the lowest SP ally. The scaling for this resets at the start of a new wave, but doesn't change when bosses summon adds or enemies join battles in the same wave. If you plan to use this to replace Fluid Sac, yes, you're going to be disappointed. If you try to have any ego replace Fluid Sac for SP and HP healing, you're going to be disappointed. Anyway, there's a second part to this ID. Full stop Heath, and one of the 2 biggest discrepancies between what people expected and what the ID actually was. Much like his boss, he's got a set of stupid high rolls, except he doesn't even need conditionals. A 14, 22, 33 by base. Turn 1, it's even more messed up, with him getting +3 pierce power and repeating that again when he rejoins after dipping. Speaking of, he retreats once he's dumped all his ammo, though unlike Honglu, this can cause issues. If he ever gets stuck without his S3 for a while, all he can do is clashable guard to ask Honglu to hit the enemies for him. Getting back on track, he's once again got far more poise gain than is reasonable. His passive can easily give him 10 poise a turn, and also 1 pierce power up, because why not? He has a unique gimmick with his S3, where it gets 25% stronger for each turn he waits, up to 4 before firing it, 12.5% for the weaker version, but who cares? You fire the big gun, deal obscene damage, and then retreat so you can take advantage of the best gimmick mechanic in the game. Overwatch assignment is really good. There's not much more to it past that. If Heath is retreated, or is a backup ID, Hong gets an extra coin on his S2 and S3, and unlike pretty much every comparable mechanic, there is no trade-off here. You don't spend any more ammo, you don't lose any coin or base power, you don't lose any offense level or on hit effects, you actually gain 1 offense level. Oh, and the bonus coins are unbreakables with the damage conditionals, including the ability to get plus 190% damage on the skill 3's 4th coin. In case it wasn't clear, I think these IDs are really good, but held back almost entirely by needing both. Neither is stronger alone than the current big two. Now to drop in quality pretty dramatically. She Ishmael. If you're wondering about the other She IDs, I'll mention them later. Ishi's the only one who can be at all count positive. Is she a good ID though? I mean, for an ID you always have, she's better than base Ish, but unless you can keep her at 50%, she's pretty rough. And even at 50%, she's not that great. As with every poorly designed Poise ID, benching BLE Sung lets her be count positive, but assuming you want to actually run a Poise team, you need her to be throwing out her S2 almost every single turn. I wouldn't run her in anything, but hey, I'm a known She hater. Now the She You Are guy. Okay, back to the good IDs. Sink. He's a pretty good ID. Fast little guy with fairly standard rolls. I'm running out of ways to describe an 11, 16, whatever spread by base, so I'm just going to start showing it and not commenting. He's got a novel, potency-less kit, using his S1 and S2 to gain substantial amounts of count, and using his S3 to swap it for potency. This would be a pretty slow and inefficient plan, so thankfully there's enough ways to provide potency to other IDs to skip the slow plan. Sinclair also has a couple of interesting gimmicks. First, his S3 can apply a pretty substantial 2 fragile, which given his high speed, can allow the entire team to reap the benefits. All you need is the enemy's part to have at least 2 slots, so Sinclair can conduct single combat. I do wish we had more IDs use that. Secondly is his passive speed conditional. If you've managed to get every sinner to be faster than every enemy, which is actually somewhat feasible for Poise, you get a great rewards. 1 whole pierce damage up. As for ego, they sure do exist, but none are special. I can't even call attention to a specific one. They're all expensive, bad, or at best just underwhelming. It's a similar case with Blade Lineage Sinclair, except he might be even worse. He rolls abysmally, a base 9, 12, 26 needs no elaboration. Thankfully, he's got a single coin power conditional on his 2 coin skill 1, so at least he can, occasionally, roll up to an 11. I'm not going to waste either of our time going into how Blade Lineage Mer saves this ID. You don't run Blade Lineage Claire for anything other than his support passive, and his kit isn't interesting enough for me to bring up any specifics. Speaking of boring IDs, Blade Lineage Autis, the penultimate ID for this section, and easily the most dull ID in the game. Her skills have next to no text, her passive is bad, and she has no relevance to any team. The most interesting thing about her is her identity story, but if we were going on about those, I'd still be talking about Ringi Song. I'll just go straight into Sync Autis, a better version of Blade Lineage, and she at least has something to talk about. Standard rolls, assuming conditional, you know the drill. She really struggles to maintain poise count, but thankfully her goal doesn't require poise at all. She's an evade tank, and one of the better ones. High speed, plus 5 defense level on the evade, and that evade can also roll up to an 18. To cement this, she's got aggro on her S1 and 2, only has the 1 stagger threshold, and her passive lowers that threshold by up to 15 per turn based on evades. Is this enough to justify running her? I'd argue no, not at all. Can you afford to run an ID that deals with 1 or 2 enemy skills per turn if they deal no damage, struggle to gain early SP, and fold against attack weights? Maybe you're more open to IDs that don't fit into standard roles, but I can't recommend tanks, especially tanks that don't do anything but tank. Ego are interesting for Autis. They're all reasonably affordable, but her best option, Sun Shower, which gives her effectively unlimited poise, it's really expensive in poise, and has a seemingly random grab bag of effects. I do like a 6-3 stack of sinking on 2 enemies for 5 resources, but I can't help but feel this ego is a symptom of the mess that was Season 2. Okay, now for the hybrid IDs. Fair warning here, all the Season 6 IDs here are going to be a lot more vibe based than anything else. It's not like I've had too much time to use them, and they all involve a certain mistake of a keyword. I'll just jump straight into it with Pequod E and say, wow, cool hybrid ID. Sadly E has a better Poise ID, a better Bleed ID, and hybrid teams only work in Mirror Dungeon. I could just repeat that for all these IDs, but sadly some are better than others. So here's the numbers, behold how average they are, here's his unique gimmick, behold how cool he is. Now onto an ID that actually bears mentioning. Sync Don 2, the hit sequel, clearly was just taking all the poise Sync Don 1 was supposed to have, and putting it on the cool new Burn ID. Would you care to guess her rolls? Thankfully there's more to her past being a Burn Poise ID. Burn is still pretty thin when it comes to IDs, so she sees play there, and now I have to debate if she's actually worth discussing in a Poise vid. She's a good ID you run, just not in an actual Poise team. But in my infinite generosity, I may as well give her a quick run over. Once again, she's an upgraded Blade Lineage Faust in practice, wanting to hit a single part repeatedly until the enemy dies, but not being gutted by other sinners attacking that part. She's got universal double coin power conditionals, all of which proc off of a 2+ speed difference per her. Her passive gives her a pretty easy 2 haste per turn, having a 15, 22, 24 set is easy, and Nerve Strike can get this up by 2 across the board. She's not dependent on burn, which means you could run her here, but why? Her ability to sustain poise is pretty dire, not having a single skill that's count positive including turn end decay, and as I said before, none of her ego do much for her here. Can't wait for a Queen of Hatred ID to somehow be poise. LCCB Ryoshu is an ID that somehow escaped from the Season 2 Tremor Rupture Mines. I couldn't begin to guess what this ID is supposed to do, but I'll try my best to figure something out. Her rolls are awful, 10, 14, 13, with below average coin counts, and as per usual, no way to profit on poise counts. Her guard is uniquely bad, being a flat 8+8, no gimmicks, no benefits. Her S3 is the only part of the kit that does anything, and that's a generous description. On crits, you get an 8-4 Tremor and Rupture stack, along with 1 Tremor Burst. Fair note, she has no other mentions of Tremor or Rupture anywhere else in her kit. You'd be better served running base Ryoshu and her countless gameplay for poise teams. At least her skills hit harder. Sync Mer is an ID that's been having a rough time of it lately, with one of his partners in crime dead and the other notably worse as a result. His place on Rupture teams has been made a lot more hazy. It's somewhat odd, therefore, that he's still a perfectly fine poise ID, and one you could honestly run over Blade Lineage Mer if you lack him. Standard rolls, please act surprised, but his conditionals are pretty impressive. Assuming max stacks of focused attack, he gets an 18, 23, 30. That last one does need a 6 speed difference though. As with most 15-3 IDs, he doesn't really care about being on a Ruptureless team, although his main issue is being a poise ID who can't stay at 20 potency for long, as with most hybrid IDs. I don't think you ever actually run him over Blade Lineage Mer, but again, he's a fine filler ID. Pequod Heath, and yet again, we get the standard rolls, trademark, alongside another hybrid ID that's fine, neither bleed or poise. That said, fine isn't the same as good, and outside of middle teams, which are pretty bad, I don't like this ID. For some reason, he just completely lacks any conditional on the S2 or S1, no clue why, but it's a running theme across the entire Pequod. As such, his only way to get past standard rolls is his passive, which gives him a tiny bit of offense and defense level when an ally is hit. This is better now that unbreakable coins exist, but the requirements for this to do much of anything are pretty high. Most enemies aren't putting up more than 3 unbreakables per turn. Oh, and can we please stop giving tank IDs super high stagger thresholds? Please? That said, I didn't mention Heath's ego earlier, so I might as well get into those. As per usual, Body Sack is great, Binds is good, and Yasun Yata is good if expensive. The only real debate is for Teth ego, with it being between the generically good AEDD and what I'd consider the worst Teth, Fell Bullets. You should already know how good AEDD is, so this will almost exclusively be me complaining about this absolute mistake of an ego. Firstly, the damage. Fell might have a second coin, but it also only ever has 1 weight, for some reason. Secondly, for the same reason I assume, it clashes pretty poorly. While 21 isn't miserable or anything, comparing it to AEDD's 22 minimum, or even Body Sack's 24, it's far lower than any 1 weight Teth should be. The actual effects aren't much better. Best case, you get a 7-1 stack of poise, a decent if finicky crit damage conditional on the second coin, and 3 entirely irrelevant bonus effects on that coin as well. Even FS Heath doesn't care about 1 ammo back. Finally, the passive is only marginally better than an on-kill passive. 3 poise potency each turn is so much worse than AEDD's 2.5% heal every time Heath gets hit. The corrosion is better than AEDD's, but also costs 10 resources, only has 1 coin, and needs 6 torn memory to be anything. Apparently this ego is just a cursed thing. Back to double O's for a moment, with Maidish. Standard double O rolls, so just subtract 2 from the S2 and S3, single coin power conditionals, and no way to maintain poise long term. In practice, she's a weaker, sinking oriented Pequod-y. Maybe I should have spent more time on him. But why would you ever use her over Molar? It's not like you can't get Molar-ish for free if you really want to use a sinking-ish. Would anyone care if I skipped over this one? Probably. Her passive is bizarrely conditional what it actually does. You need to be faster, land a crit, and even then you only get 3 triggers per turn. For context, the S3 applies 5 debuffs, of which only the last one scales notably with 1 more potency. Would the passive increasing count application and removing the per turn limitation be too much? Yes, double O's are only supposed to be support passives. As for the captain, she's showing her age. Standard rolls, just with her built-in 1 base power to the S1, and once again, no conditionals on the S1 or S2. She's a fairly demanding ID, either needing you to feed her kills or feed her SP. If you don't want her to go whale mode, need all your Pierce weak sinners. I really wish there was more to say about her, but Poise doesn't exactly care about her these days. There's very few S1s worth calling still in the team, and there are far too few sources of SP regen available in Poise teams to make her not fall apart after the first enemy wave and unfocused. In a focused encounter she's better, but better at what? All she has going for her is a good S2. I'll be doing Zeechanish along with the 2 C IDs after all the other hybrids. So here's a miserable little wretch, KK Rodion. Somehow, she's not the worst triple O in this video, but she's definitely the worst hybrid triple O. She's worse than most of the double O's in this section, honestly. She doesn't even have standard coin amounts, let alone standard rolls. Her only count positive skill is the goddamn counter, and if you don't give her a Blade Lineage E-Slang as a support passive, she withers and dies almost instantly. Even in bleed she's awful, having no count and only applying potency on the S2. You aren't critting with the S3. At least she's good in MD. Pirate Greg finally lets me discuss a hybrid ID that I personally dislike. He's got a lot of defenders, but I'm convinced that's just MD players speaking. Below standard rolls, with the S1 dropping a total power and the S2 dropping a coin. But that's not enough to completely kill an ID. He can't ever be count positive, as per usual, only gaining enough count to stay neutral on the S2 and having far too many on-crit conditionals to warrant a poise gain that little. He's got a single, unachievable coin power conditional on the S1, that same condition twice on the S2, and a slightly better condition for up to 3 coin power on the S3. There's enough issues yet? I hope not, because it gets worse. His passive keys off of heads hits on bleeding targets, rewarding him with up to 100% damage on the last coin of his S3. Remember, damage bonuses are additive, not multiplicative, so not quite as good as doubling damage, but admittedly still a good boost. The problem? He only has a single instance of bleed infliction not on a crit, on the last coin of his S2. This means that gaining unjust enrichment requires either getting lucky and landing a crit on one of his first coins, even with his garbage poise gain, running another Poise ID, which is a bad idea outside of MD, or letting Greg use back-to-back skills, one of which can't be allowed to clash. If any of these sound reasonable, then don't let this video dissuade you. Please, go back to playing Poise in MD, clearly you're having fun, and I'd hate to make you stop. Thankfully, Gregor got his first good ID this season, and it's a Poise ID at that. C. Gregor is a shockingly good Rupture ID, let alone a hybrid Rupture Poise ID given to Kim Ji-hoon's favourite punching bag. While he needs Serpent Arm to work, gaining it off of a clashable Gluttony Guard, or an entirely reasonable first turn S3, makes him not hurt to read. His numbers are, surprisingly for Gregor, standard, and once your Serpent Arm, his S1 and S2 are count positive, and given that Poise now is up to 4 reasonable Poise Rupture IDs, you can even occasionally fulfill his various Rupture conditionals. Obviously he's nowhere near perfect, but unlike every single prior hybrid ID, these hybrid conditionals means he can actually gain coin power in either team solo, or even easier in a full hybrid team. I've been a big hater on Gregor, Rupture and hybrid IDs since well before my first video, but genuinely, this ID is enough to make me slightly reconsider. The only real weakness of C. Greg is being made of tissue paper, 3 stagger thresholds and a neutral defense level. At least his support passive wants him to die. His ego aren't great here, as is normal for Greg. Leisure Domain is far more reasonable than I'd have expected before working on this one, but the rest are pretty bad, or far too expensive. Thankfully, I get to talk about C. Greg version 2, C. Rodia. She's almost identical to C. Greg. Same basis, coin power conditionals, mechanically identical guards, almost identical S1s, passives that do the same thing for the same cost. I may still hate the high show for how they're designed, but at least Poise gets rewarded for it. Feel free to take everything I said about C. Greg, use the guard turn 1, build Poise off of Serpent Arm, then use the S1 and S2 to build up potency and count. The only major difference is their S3s. Gregor gets a single target nuker, rolling up to a 28, with a trivial 320% damage conditional before even looking at the passive, whereas Rodgman gets a 5 coin volley that can hit for far more damage, but needs a slight Rupture stack to start with. I really like both of these IDs, which again is a major shock to me. Let's finally move on to the last hybrid, for now, and an ID people have already called awful. And yeah, she's pretty bad in pure Rupture, but Zeechun Ishmael is a very complex ID, and has uses past Morning Talisman. I actually think she has a major upside in Poise, but I won't deny she's limited, especially compared to how shockingly good the C IDs are. Unlike the cooler Poise Rupture IDs, her coin power conditionals are entirely detached from Poise, her Poise gain is poor, needing kills against targets with Rupture to gain a decent pace, her offense level isn't enough to consistently trigger her passive, and her Rupture is next to nothing. Given all that, the upside better be pretty good. Thankfully, she can run away. If you only run one backup ID, you can have full stop Heath retreats, and then the next turn, have Zeechanish retreat to ensure you bring FS Heath back fully loaded. Is this worth it? I'm not entirely certain. You get another 10 shots from Heath, full 4 stacks of concentration, and 3 pierce power up for another turn, but you have to run a pretty mediocre Poise ID, and one with only a single really notable ego. I'll get into that in a moment. Personally, I'm for it, but if you have trouble keeping all your IDs alive, or just don't want to invest resources in an untested ID, I struggle to say you're even making a mistake ignoring her. As for that ego, I finally get to say more about Blind Obsession than Big Ego. It still is Big Ego, but it's also, assuming a decent speed roll from Ishmael, a pretty substantial buff. A net plus 65 SP is incredible, only falling behind Fluid Sac for immediate SP regen, on top of applying up to 14 poise count among allies, and then giving 2 Piss power up and 2 damage up to 4 allies. It's not cheap, but doesn't cost any particularly rare resources, and comes with a pretty good passive, giving Isang some haste and offense level up. Would be nice if Ish could gain that offense level up, but I digress. Once again, good ego, hardly mandatory. Now that covers all the hybrid IDs we've gotten so far, so I'll move on to the weirder ones. I'll spoil it now, but none of these belong on a Poise team, and most of them don't belong on any team. If you want to build a Poise team, feel free to skip ahead. First, Lobotomy Corp Remnant Faust. What distinguishes her from the other hybrid IDs? Honestly, not much, but I at least wanted to give her a specific mention. This kit is fucked. Launch IDs had a really bad habit of sticking all an ID's power into their S3, and she's no exception. An 11, 14, 20, with the only conditional being plus 3 coin power on this skill 3, makes zero sense. She's one of very few IDs with haste and no speed conditionals. She has a passive that triggers based on poise count, but she can't ever hit that threshold without substantial outside support. This is a running theme, and despite all that, is still one of the better double O's. You don't want to run her, obviously, but an interesting relic of times gone by. Zwei Rodgion is probably the first thing that comes to mind when you think of weird poise IDs. That is, if you remember her existence. A poise tank with no potency and shield gain based on count, that for some reason is a flat amount, not percentage based. It's a poor start, and nothing on the kit really changes that. An 8, 14, 13, with once again the only conditional being 2 coin power on the skill 3. Why does this keep happening? She also, for reason beyond human ken, has an on-crit conditional on the skill 3. The effect is fine, 1 fragile next turn is entirely reasonable, but why is it an on-crit? You need outside support to ever have better than 5% odds, and any poise potency on her means she'll burn through her poise count, thus crippling her entire gimmick. This idea feels like a practical joke, and I hope it's the reason Zwei's been forgotten. 3 for 3 with gimmicky 00 poise IDs, and it's one that's somehow slower than Rodion's 2-4. Mariachi Sinclair. This ID exists, I assume, for people who really like gambling, and probably also liked Kanto too. Once again, we somehow have an 8, 8, 19, although at least this time the S2 is a conditional to hit 14. I swear doublers are awful. He is legally a sinking ID, though I'll say now, I'm not mentioning him in the sinking video given how dysfunctional he is. First of all, he rolls awfully, point and laugh, but more importantly, his on-hit effects are somehow worse. He has a single coin for poise and sinking count, both of which are a single point, and immediately followed by a second or third for poise coin, meaning both of them far too quickly. His S3 has multiple effects relating to critting, but once a fucking again, he cannot trigger these without outside support. He's got -3 offense level across the board, meaning his clashes are all -1 by default, and his evade, the part people seem to praise, is only a 15 with no conditionals. If nothing else, it has an unlimited gain poise count effect. I don't see why you'd ever use this over Sync Outis, and I still think she's bad. Finally, here's the list of every single ID in the game that has poise but no access to count. I don't want to waste time discussing IDs that are poise in name only, especially when plenty of these are double O's that do nothing interesting. Special mention to all the IDs that gain poise from passives though, they'll be mentioned in their respective status vids, and thankfully they're all good enough to warrant at least a few paragraphs apiece. And now the team. I actually have a bit more to say here than usual, given that IDs 8 to 12 actually matter here. First, my starting 7, and then the mandatory backup ID you run to make full stop Heath work. You could let your support passives also be backup IDs, but that's not a great fit with Zetian Mail. You're slowing down your ability to reaccess Heath, which means you probably shouldn't run Ish at all. As for actually playing the team, the CIDs always want to start with a guard, or if in the bottom slots, an S3, making sure to refresh Serpent Arm every 3 turns, while the rest of the team wants to build a 3 pride res chain. Once Heath rotates out, have Zetian use her evade the moment her launcher hits 3 or more, while Ryoshi should use Thoracalgia the turn she arrives. If you really want to run a Faust, swap Ryoshi out for her, and still use Thora as soon as possible. Superbia is still really good. Finally, try to have your CIDs target the same part. While relying on the Rupture stack for damage is unwise, the slight bit of Rupture will help the two with their coin power conditionals, and Deathrite Venom triggers are a nice advantage. That should be everything, so time for the standard YouTuber business. I want to talk about shiny new Mer ID, So pick between Burn and Tremor. I'll do the Sinking vid after one of those two, hopefully in time to talk about Night of Despair, and then after that I'll do the second of Burn and Tremor, assuming I don't have to make any addendum videos between. In any case, thanks for all your time, your comments on the last one, and the handful of you who subscribed. Can't wait to see what mistakes I make in the comments this time.